In this week's episode, we are very lucky to be joined by photo mentor Zoe Whishaw. She talks to us about quiet phases, how to keep yourself motivated, and reaching out to new clients, amongst many other exciting and really interesting topics. There's so much great information in this week's episode, so sit back, lend us your ears, and enjoy. Afternoon, Tom.
Hello, mate. How are you?
Not too bad. We have got an exciting guest on today, haven't we?
We do, Zoe.
This podcast is going to be this episode. I think is going to be an absolute gem. It's quite a long one, so we're going to keep our intro relatively, our ramble chat relatively short today.
And here's Zoe.
Yeah, and that's it. But we thought we'd take the opportunity. Actually, we've been getting a few questions in on mainly over Instagram, actually, and we wanted to just address some of them. That sounds very serious, doesn't it?
It does sound.
There's a few matters we want to address.
We've had some serious complaints.
Some allegations have been made.
Some allegations. They haven't. We're clean, so don't worry. Everything's fine. But we have had a couple of questions, and we love getting questions. So the more questions, the better. Really, we're trying to do this to help. So if you've got questions, ask away, and we'll do our very level best to give you a no BS answer. Really. But we thought we'd kind of shout out to a couple of people with their questions that they've put on, and we'll try and address them here and there. So I don't know if you want to do the first one, or shall I?
Well, so we had one from Ollie Edwards on Instagram, and he was asking about our lighting bags, and I thought that was an easy one for me to do, because I can just say, Ollie, I've done a YouTube video on my lighting bag, so go and watch that.
Good.
Not to be blunt, no, only because it's about half an hour long and it goes into great detail, more detail than I'll go into here. But Tom, what about your lighting bag?
No one's ever seen inside that. Can you imagine? No, I haven't had the time or inclination. Not even that I haven't had the time. Of course I've had time. We've been on lockdown. I haven't had the inclination. Actually, that's not even true. What I keep doing with my kit bags is I keep changing them around. In fact, I messaged Greg this morning going, I'm thinking about buying another kit bag. And he just replied going, we'll talk about this later. So my kit bag is kind of forever changing. But at the moment, I've gone as lightweight as possible. So it basically, my main lighting is just revolves around 3 Profoto B10 Plus heads with a whole kind of mixture of hard and soft mods, really. Even though I tend to use really big soft stuff, I've started experimenting with the smaller hard ones. Really big soft.
Cut all that, shall we?
Right, next one.
I take my off the ball for 3 minutes.
What I want to do is I want to get to shoot, so get my really hard Magnum out. Anyway, right, back in the room.
I'm not sure that's what Ollie wanted to know, but
sorry. Basically, trying to keep it all as simple as possible, going with the KISS method, which is obviously keep it simple, stupid, and trying to have. I'm not calling you stupid, Ollie. It's the saying. But yeah, basically just trying to keep my kit down to as light as possible, really, for when things do get busy again. I do have to start traveling and flying more kit and stuff. But yeah, my kit now is based around the B10 Pluses because they're small, lightweight, loads of power, great light.
Excellent. So another question we had come in was from Mike Dan, and that was to do with Capture One and what prompted us. We should have been promoted. What prompted us to move from Lightroom? We've both got slightly different kind of journeys we've taken with that, haven't we?
Yeah, you've been using Lightroom up until quite recently, right?
Yeah, so I guess Lightroom sort of I didn't used to shoot as much tethered. I still don't shoot huge amounts tethered. So for me, I was doing more kind of editorial work or work with NGOs where there would be large bodies of images, and I found kind of working with Lightroom catalogs. I used to keep like a year, each catalog would be a year. I found that the best way of working, because at the end of the year, it allowed me to very easily go and look over loads of different jobs all in one place, pull out images for portfolio, etc., etc. I had all my presets. Was kind of relatively happy with Lightroom. Few issues I had with it. Found it a little bit kind of dumbed down in places, and with each subsequent kind of update that was coming out, I found it was getting a little bit more dumbed down each time, which was annoying me. And then they brought out an update that just totally threw everything out the window in terms of presets and just broke everything basically.
You're talking
and
about Lightroom versus Lightroom Classic.
I think it was around that period, and I just lost patience with trying to sort it all out, because these things should just work. And if a company's going to bring out an update that breaks something that's working, that just pisses me off no end. And sorry, so I had basically, yeah, I moved I'm waffling here, but basically I was in the transition of moving. It took me a while because of keeping everything in that kind of year-long catalog. I wanted to move at the end of a year, so that I still had an entire year within Lightroom rather than split across Lightroom and Capture One sessions. And I've been using Capture One for the past, probably full-time for the past 2 years, probably. And I think I made the switch 2018, 2019. So yeah, I just find it processes my Fuji files a lot better than Lightroom did, and I find it processes most of my raw files a lot better than Lightroom did. Still not
and process recipes.
Process recipes, workflows, everything is just a lot cleaner. I changed my workflows when I moved across. It's just so much easier now to keep disciplined with your raw files, your JPEGs, your high res, having them all folder structured, all of that kind of stuff, because that's the nature of Capture One and the way it processes and has those process recipes in place. I'm sent Tom off to sleep. You just a massive yawn.
that was a terribly timed yawn. Sorry. No, that was very interesting, Greg. Very interesting. And for me, it is very different, because I've been using Capture since.
So was that a new version of Capture One?
Capture One. No, I've been using that since like 2000. I don't even know. I've been using numbers anymore. Really long time, as long as I can remember. As long as my galleries kind of go back, I think 2012, 13. I've been using it a really, really long time, maybe even before then. But I've just had everything. Each shoot is in a separate session, and I've just always had it like that. So it's pretty much, because I was using Lightroom originally, but that's basically now all I know is sessions. I don't even use catalogs. I just use sessions.
No, I don't use the Capture One catalogs. I don't think they've been a massive success for them in terms of, they brought them in, I think, when Lightroom they were in big competition, getting a lot of people moving across from Lightroom, to try and encourage people to say, listen, come over to Capture One. You can use catalogs. It's very similar to what you'll be used to, etc., etc. But I'm not sure they've taken off.
I don't think they're as reliable. I've tried using one for I have a camera that I carry with me daily, my daily cam, and I did try to have them, but I'm thinking we're talking like 150,000 images, so that catalog, funnily enough, didn't work. So I think maybe I was just asking too much. I'm going to go with that. But yeah, I've been using sessions now. Well, I don't know, as long as I can really remember. It's been great, and I love that. Say for example, I need to go traveling, and I kind of just need to take the previous month or two shoots with me. I copy over the session folders, which brings everything. I don't need to kind of export part of a catalog or anything like that, because everything's in small manageable chunks. I just take the whole session with me, and then I can open it up in Capture on my laptop, work on it, and then when I come back to the office, transfer the whole session over again, and then everything's there. All the settings, all the changes, all the grades, everything. So yeah, for me, it's been just the best possible software solution.
Well, I hope that answers your questions there, Mike. But if you've got anything more that you want us to go into in depth, because I'm sure that wasn't particularly much of a deep dive. But if you've got anything specific, then reach out. We've got one more here from Matthew Joseph. Sorry, I'm laughing because Matt, whenever I see your surname, I for some reason I don't see the P and the H, and I always think it's Jose. So I've been calling you Matthew Jose. But anyway,
I don't see Matt as a Jose.
No,
and I've known him quite a while.
The blondest Jose I've ever met. Matt, sorry to disappoint you with the theme tune. That's all Tom's doing. So I'm sure that if you really are that into the YMCA, and then you please send in a video of you dancing. We won't be able to show it on the podcast, but we could maybe do
we will be entertained.
We might be able to do like a reaction recording. So yeah, anything else that you guys have got, please do leave comments or reach out on Instagram or Twitter, or send an email. Because obviously we're doing this for you guys, the listeners, so we kind of want to get an understanding of what you really want to know, and what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if you feel like it might be a bit of a stupid question, the chances are we've probably all, had to kind of deal with it at some point in our career. So yeah, just fire away. We're not rude much, so and we've been asked some wild questions. So fire away. There's nothing that will shock us.
Well, sounds like a challenge.
Does, doesn't it? Careful, don't send us anything illegal.
Yeah. Well, send it to Tom, not me.
Yeah.
But yeah, today's program, I think you'll really like it. Don't want to take up too much more of your time, because it's a stonking one this week. It's quite a long one, but fully worth it.
Definitely worth a listen, for sure.
You are getting a hell of a lot for your money listening to this one, I think.
All that money.
All that money, indeed. So enjoy, and we will see you on the next one. Okay, so this week on the show, we are very fortunate to be joined by Zoe Whishaw. And Zoe is a photography mentor and photographic consultant. And she's going to be talking to us about a number of things. So I just want to say welcome, Zoe. Thank you for coming on.
Pleasure.
Could you start by perhaps telling the listeners a little bit about your backstory, kind of how you started in the industry, and how that's kind of brought you to where you are now, and what it is you do now as a job?
Sure. Yes, because it's not that obvious what a mentor is if you're not actually a photographer yourself. So maybe I'd actually start at that point. I mean, a mentor to photographers really is either a photography professional, a respected photography professional who would mentor and work closely with other photographers, or somebody like myself who has been in the industry and embedded in the industry for many, many years, and can therefore give that objective help and advice, to photographers. So perhaps I'll just pedal back a bit. So I started out in the business really through my love of the magic of the darkroom. While I was at university, I was studying something quite apart from photography. I think rather like you, Greg. I was a scientist actually once upon a time, but I got very involved in the black and white darkroom and the magic that sort of gave me. And like all of us, I think in this business, there was a slight obsession that started to reveal itself, which was rather lovely. And so rather than carrying on as a scientist, I actually found work in a photo agency in London, which eventually became Getty Images. And the company beforehand was actually, a leading one of its kind. It was called Tony Stone Images. And it's an interesting point that I got the job, I think, because I had an opinion about pictures. My interview was all about, so what do you think about this picture? And I didn't just say what I thought about it, but I also said why I thought what I thought about it. And because it's very easy just to say, I like this picture and I don't like that picture. But I think something that's been part of my whole sort of being as a mentor and working with photographers is to try and give relevant and helpful critiques and feedback. Because too often it's just, well, that doesn't work and neither does that, but this one does. And I think unless you know a bit about why, I think it's... Anyway, so then I spent 17 years working my way up in the business, and then it became Getty. So I started out as an editor and then an art director. obviously working on set with all sorts of different photographers. And then I eventually went into creative management and was the European director of photography for many years. So that meant I traveled, frankly, all over the world. So even though it was European, it also dealt with Australia. And I was managing
that well-known part of Europe.
In a very well-known part of Europe. And I was managing teams of editors, art directors, producers, and so forth. And my role at that point was very much about helping motivate my teams as well as photographers directly. So I would run brainstorm sessions, and I would project manage, very, very large shoots of, 200 models and so forth. So a lot of hands-on experience as well as sort of, as I say, creative management. So I left there about 11 years ago and realized that actually, working on a one-to-one, which is what a mentor does really, was very much more rewarding in many ways, because I could have a direct, ongoing, often impact and support to photographers who often feel very lonely and isolated. And so the work I do now is really helping photographers at all stages in their career. It may be that they're just starting out. In fact, I'm just starting this in a few days, mentoring a recent graduate, and I'll be working with her for the year, overcoming obstacles to whichever stage they're at. It could be starting out. It could be a photographer's been very busy, very active, very successful, but they've come across a lull, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a minute, in their work or in their phase of career, and they need to reestablish that energy, that connection with their love of photography. Or it may be photographers looking for a change in direction. So, the work I do is very much about trying to get to know the photographer, as an individual, what motivates them, what's authentic to them, why does their style, or doesn't in fact their style, suit who they are? And maybe that's the crux of the problem. Sometimes that's what we discover, that they've been trying to be something that doesn't suit them because they've been perhaps more reactive than proactive in their activity as a photographer. And I think that, again, I'm sure we'll talk a bit about that later, because I think it's very relevant to try and help photographers to unearth what's truly reasonable and makes sense for them to take their work forward, and what clients make sense. So yeah, the work I do now is very much helping photographers fulfill these goals or to sort of, I suppose, provide the focus on where best to take their activity to get to these goals that they're aiming towards, and to help them get there, really.
Amazing. So it's actually a very, very helpful thing. Like you say, it's a very, very lonely profession. So actually, I'm sure a lot of people are just happy to have someone to talk to about things.
Well, and it's about sort of accountability as well. I think that when you work on your own as a photographer, you do, well, any creative actually, it has to be a self-motivated process. And any freelancer, I think, has got to find their own inner energy. And I think you don't succeed at anything, never mind photography, if you don't have that drive and determination. But I think there are times when it can be helpful to have someone to be accountable to say, well, look, let's think about sort of these ideas for marketing, and then for the photographer to go away and then maybe come back sort of 3 months, 6 months later and say, look, well, this is what happened and this is the outcome. And, so that you actually feel somebody that knows you and that can carry on supporting you. And some photographers I work with, actually, I've been working with, for several years on and on, ongoing basis. And it helps them to feel that the process is supported, even though I'm not leading them by the hand at all. It's and it's always for them to come up with the answers. I'm not I provide the opportunity, I think, to look at options and ideas for how to take things forward. It's not about writing a checklist and saying you do this, you do this, you do this, and you do this. Because if I think the answers don't come from oneself, then it's not going to be sustainable.
Sure, it's not authentic.
It's not authentic, and I know that's a very overused word, but I think sustainability is also very overused. But I do think for something to last and to be genuine and to be trusted, actually, by clients, because in the end, clients, they can sniff out, art directors and so forth, art buyers, they can sniff out whether somebody's sort of putting on something that isn't necessarily genuine.
Oh God, they absolutely can. I think a lot of people think they can't, but I'm telling you from personal experience. I once had a meeting. I went in and I took my book in, and she knows who she is. She's very straight talking. She's fantastic. I've been back multiple times to see her, and we really get on. First time I went in and saw her, she went, "Do you want some feedback on the book?" And I kind of went, "Oh yeah." It's great. In my head, it was like fantastic. And she went, first half of the book, really good. Feels like you. Second half of the book, shit, get rid of it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Oh, right. Cool. Okay. And I did. I got rid of it. I got rid of it all because she was right.
And she was right. Well, you see, that's the other thing about, I think, getting feedback, which is another sort of general point, for photographers in general. I think that it's really important to get objective, professional, rather than friends and family, sort of feedback on one's work, because not everybody's going to say the same thing, of course, and it is subjective. You can't get away from that. But what may well happen that several people who you respect and who've been in the business long enough to be able to articulate and have a valid viewpoint may well say something that is resonating, in some way, and it may be the same thing that's kind of resonating from different people. And because it's too easy to be isolated and emotionally involved with one's work. I mean, gosh, I don't need to say that to you. I'm sure.
It's also it's interesting to have that coming from a mentor who has worked with lots of other photographers, because quite often when you're getting that feedback from, say, a potential client, it can feel a little bit like they're coming at it from their point of view, but they don't necessarily always understand the photographer's point of view, perhaps, or what you might have gone through to create that work, or where you might be going with it. And sometimes it's not necessarily a case of having to throw away a whole bunch of stuff that's, killing your darlings. It's a case of perhaps seeing it for what it is, which is work in progress, or a way of kind of getting to a different point, but you're not exactly, but you're not sure, you weren't necessarily sure at the time that that's what it was about. But in hindsight, you can look at something and say, you know what, it wasn't the finished product, but I needed to have done that in order to have learned how to get to here.
Yeah. And as you say, Greg, unless it's somebody that's truly objective and doesn't have an axe to grind, or hasn't got a sort of a chip on their shoulder or anything, you need to know that somebody is really wanting to help you for your sake and not theirs. And I think the point, I suppose I'm fascinated by how, just in a general sense, how one overcomes adversity in whatever that means. And as creatives, I mean, I was brought up by two parents who are both artists. My mother's a sculptor, my father's a painter. And I know intrinsically, deeply what it means to create and have, one's own ideas and to have to execute them, create them, and then do something with them. They were never commercial, so that's obviously, very much fine art. And I think that to know that deep down and to understand how the creative process works and how important it is to express this so that it's true to you, I think that's helped me a lot to understand how photographers work, without, being, of course, at the moment, I'm not on the side of commissioning. I used to commission photographers, but obviously not now. And I think that's why I enjoy what I do so much, because I know that every photographer that comes to me, it's like it's just them and me, and it's not about trying to do anything but help them to take themselves to the next level, whatever that might be.
So I guess one thing that would be, we touched on it briefly then, and I mean, it's an important area of what we do is and the realization that you have to come to, that as photographers, you're going to go through periods of feast and famine. You're going to go through periods where you have the roller coaster, and with the highs come the lows, the busy periods come the fallow periods. And obviously, the elephant in the room being a massive pandemic that we're currently going, we don't want it to be solely focused on that, but this has very much highlighted that there's now a lot of photographers who have quiet periods. It'd be interesting to kind of like delve into that. What do you think that we can take out of quiet phases?
Well, it's a curious thing that people that come to see me, this is quite apart from the pandemic, people often do come to see me when they're having a quiet phase, but that's also contrasted by those that are terribly busy, but they're not happy being busy with what they're doing. So, but let's just think about those that come to me and the mistaken problem is, I think, during with a lot of photographers, they assume straight away they need an agent. That is the go-to. I mean, obviously it's not all the time, but a lot of the knee-jerk reaction is, right, it's a quiet time, right, I need somebody else to pull me out of this time. And it's almost never true to say that they are in a position to get an agent at that point. So what we're in at the moment, the pandemic, is like a giant version of a normal lull that most photographers go through. That even if they're very successful, there's a lull because, they need to rejig and rethink and always evolve. And through, evolution, not that I want to go into the science of it, goes through all sorts of peaks and troughs in itself, different stops and starts. So it is, the first thing to say is that when anybody experiences or feels a lull, either on its way or you're right in the middle of a lull, is to not panic. Because they are, at whatever scale, pandemic or not, they are part of the process of being a creative. And the key, I suppose, is to think about how one reacts. What is one's go-to a kind of reaction to a lull? As I say, to some, it's to reach to somebody. Oh, let me get somebody else to help with this, as in get an agent. It may well be to get a professional to help, such as talking about it. That's different. But really, it comes down to working things out yourself. So the kind of reactions that don't help are sort of feeling defeated, feeling you want to give up, feeling you want to roll over, you want to sort of just throw the towel in. What can help, first of all, is to know that it's a bit like meditation. They do say this, don't they? I don't know if either of you meditate, but I don't do a lot of it at all. But that when you are attempting to meditate, it's important to let the difficulties and the worries actually be inside your mind. Let them come and then let them drift out. So this lull business, it's true, it's real, it's there, it's difficult. It will pass, and it'll pass with more constructive outcomes if you do actually just get stuck in.
Yeah.
Get busy. And of course, we can talk about what that means, because that's all a bit vague in some ways. But it's about knowing that there's an opportunity to revamp, to do some research, to reinvest, and to revisit what all these revisit what you have got, whether you could tune things up, change things. So there's a mass of things that can be done constructively during a lull, no matter how big the lull is, that might take you on a different journey as a result of it. And that's what's really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry to jump in. I'd love to go back to what you said about letting the kind of the worries and the stress being inside and really thinking about it. For me, I'm going back to meditation. I don't meditate, but I guess I do in a way. I've started doing box breathing.
What's that?
Box breathing is basically breathing in for 5 seconds, holding it for 5 seconds, breathing out for 5 seconds, and then holding that for 5 seconds.
Oh,
it
sounds like hypnobirthing.
Kind of. That's where I got the inspiration.
That would be a surprise, wouldn't it?
Oh, guys, going into labour quickly. I'll be right back.
Yeah. No, but that's interesting, because it does allow, it's a way of your. Sorry, Tom, I'm jumping into what you were going to say. You carry on.
No, I was just going to say. So, I kind of have the two methods. So I do the box breathing, which I do if I kind of start to feel stressed, or I kind of feel like my anxiety is kind of peaking up or anything. And so I do the box breathing, and it just gives me a couple of seconds. I even get patronized by my Apple Watch telling me to breathe constantly, which is not helpful. But I think
a lot of this is about just acknowledging it's not. It is fear. There is a certain amount of fear. There is, we must realize that it's not a pleasant feeling to suddenly feel that your income is in jeopardy. That your regular go-to bread and butter sort of work may be somewhat sort of reduced or completely out the question for a little while. It's about it's because I think there is a reaction that one assumes we should have, which is just to deny it, or to be so strong that you can just weather all these things. No, part of weathering it is to acknowledge it, and to know that you, as a photographer, never mind any other creatives, but writer or poet or whatever, you are sort of inbuilt problem solving. It's part of your very nature, and just to allow for a minute for that awful feeling of pressure and of worry and concern, just to actually let it be there for a little bit. And then goes back to Greg, what I was saying, quite interesting to look at, what reactions do people have? And I think it's quite good to think, now, what am I good at? What do I usually revert to, or what do I know has helped me in the past to be successful as a photographer, and to really, put these things down on paper. You're a natural problem solver, for example. You might be very adaptable. You are great with pulling teams together. You are good at relationship building. You might find, yes, some of your skill set could be tuned up, and actually you're not great at editing your own work, and maybe you're not great at, you need some more ideas for marketing. So to look at the things that you're intuitively you're good at, because you've had to sort of get out of a hole in the past, even albeit a smaller hole or a smaller situation. It's really important to know that you do have these strengths and somewhat, weaknesses or whatever. Both of these are important to look at, because at times of a lull, both of these things can be looked at and addressed. One will give you strength, and one will give you opportunities to rethink, reinvest, and to research into. So I think it's important to know that you've got inherent strengths that have got you to where you are anyway, at whatever stage you're at in your career. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a photographer.
I also think there's an element of, I 100% agree with that. And I think that's really important thing to kind of be able to be self-aware enough and to notice. But I also think another really crucial thing, and it's pretty similar to that, I think it really touches on that, is knowing what you need to feed you creatively. And I know that sounds like a wishy-washy sentence, but what I mean by that is that sometimes when you are feeling low and you are feeling unmotivated, how do you get yourself into the headspace where you can allow yourself to get excited about something? And for some people that might be through exercise, for some people that might be through literally tidying their desk, or doing something that distracts them. For other people it might be going to an art gallery. Might not be so easy right now. But for me, for example, I find it incredibly indulgent to be able to take time in the morning to sit down with a bunch of photography books, that I haven't looked at for several months, and take the time to go through and see. And that kind of feeds me and makes me motivated for my own work then. And
to not feel guilty about it.
Yes.
And to know, that's another crucial thing, I think, is to know that, in fact, I don't know whether, Greg, we've ever done this before in the past. There's a certain element of randomness that needs to come into a creative process. I'm a firm believer of that, and I think that by allowing yourself to not quite know why you are sitting yourself a half an hour or whatever it is to look through books, your unconscious is what's working at that point. And so I think you put me on to the cards. Yes, the oblique strategies.
That's it. Yeah. Yes. What would tell us a bit about
Brian Eno? Okay, so these Tom, I don't know if you're aware of these. Brian Eno, who is this marvelous sort of creative spirit, I think, created, I think it was in the 70s actually, but I'm sure we could be corrected on that, a set of cards to help him, I think, to overcome creative blocks. They're called oblique strategies, and I'm sure we can probably put a little link to some of these. And they are sentences which don't necessarily have much meaning to them in themselves, but at times, if you feel you are in a bit of a rut or you can't quite see yourself, I mean, it could be something as simple as trying to rethink how to create a picture of a still life of a glass of water, which is what I'm looking at on my desk here. Something as mundane as that, and you're trying to reinvent yourself, because actually that's another key thing that, if you're going to try and get yourself out of a lull, out of a rut, out of a quiet phase, it's important to think, how can I reinvent some of what I do so that it actually does speak differently to other people? But so imagine, you're trying to reinvent a very apparently mundane. So these oblique strategies, you can pick a single card which has a phrase on it that you need to live with and stick with. It might say, look at it from the other direction. I mean, that might be one of the expressions, or it could be saying something. You see, I'm not going to try and pretend I can say what these are, but they are deliberately, and some of them seem so obtuse, but you've got to stick with it, and it really forces you into a corner. And I'm a true believer as well of that some of the greatest sort of creative ideas come out of the fewest crayons, if you like, the fewest number of colors you have to play with, metaphorically. So, the more opportunities you have to be creative, and if you've got every sort of resource at your fingertips, it can be like a rabbit in the headlights. So if you reduce what it is you have in the first place to something like a word, or a phrase like, a glass of water, and then to some other concept or phrase or something, and you just have to sit and force yourself for 15 minutes to do nothing, but think about how to reinvent this with this wonderful piece of randomness. It's amazing what it can. I mean, Greg, have you actually tried to use those very often?
Well, there is. I don't think I have personally. I remember at the time, because when we first met was probably about 6 years
Yes, it
ago.
was.
I think. I remember at the time looking at it, and there's actually a website that is still live. We will link to it, and I've put it in, and it comes up with. So today's pick is in total darkness or in a very large room, very quietly.
Exactly. So you then have to think. So no, but that's interesting. You see, because if you allow your mind to open up and not be too literal about it, we're still thinking of a glass of water at the moment. I'm just trying to be very mundane about it. Then, if you can then see how can your mind use the words and what does it conjure up in your mind when you just read it? And then something interesting will come, because I think sometimes one does need a bit of assistance in being nudged in a direction. It might be that just he could just put the word blue up there. It could, or actually that's a bit of a dull color, but red or something. And you've then just got to think. So I think just
it definitely sparks things. I mean, there's a photography book called The Photographer's Playbook, which is almost like an extended version of this, in the sense of trying to push you down quite specific kind of. Well, some of them are more specific than others, but for listeners who don't know, that's a book that is written by lots of photography practitioners and is aimed at kind of almost giving you mini projects for when you feel like you're stuck in a rut, and this is like that, but what's beautiful about it is it's constrained down to the minimalist things. I mean, the next one I've just clicked on there, because the website literally you could just you'd be here all day clicking on it. It just says, "Is it finished?" ?
And and Greg, the point about that is you've got to stop yourself from clicking through, because put yourself in a corner. Put yourself in a corner and force yourself to not let yourself wriggle out. That's where the creative juices
to be like, actually, that one's a bit difficult. I want to try another one.
No, and that's where you see, but it's hard to do this, but it can be very exciting, and it can be very energizing to realize that these answers are often within you. And just one little thought, that I know that Brian Eno himself says that nothing does focus your attention like stepping onto unfamiliar ground. That's something that I know that he's something like that he said. So, and it's true. It's where some of your best creative output can come when you least expect it.
It's rediscovering that thing that we lose when we turn from children into kind of young adults. Is the idea of play.
Yeah.
And nothing is kind of allowing your brain to really go where it needs to go without having the constraints of all the things that our mind brings to it, such as
it's the unconscious
and all that.
Yeah, it's the unconscious, which is why your morning coffee with your books is actually a marvelous way to unintentionally be inspired. You don't know what you're looking for, because you're not looking for anything. You're just seeing in the back of your mind. You might think, well, I'm just thinking about a portrait. I know that might be something I'm going to be working on with an elderly person or something. And as you're looking through, you just might see a bit of body language that you're quite interested in, but you didn't realize you're looking for it. No, it's something I do with photographers actually when we're brainstorming for project ideas. So getting busy is one of the best. If you're in a lull, as you say, it might be tidying your desk. It could be sort of sitting and allowing yourself time to actually switch off, but do something that you really enjoy. But also, sometimes it's just jumping in and not knowing what the end result will be. And what I'm talking about here is, it may be ideas for projects. And a lot of photographers say to me, either I don't have enough ideas, I don't have any ideas, or I have too many ideas. And they're sort of two sides of the same coin. And the fact is one just needs to get on with shooting. Just get the camera and just get busy. You may throw the lot away, or, metaphorically, you may not have a particular intention, but you've just got to get shooting. And what is the biggest energizer, I think, is to know that there are possibilities, not necessarily sort of perfect outcomes, but that possibilities are actually there. And you only get to know whether there are possibilities for you if you actually do something. So I think a danger can be to sit back too much and just feel hopeless. But I think allowing a little bit of realization, you kind of soothe the wounds as they're bound to feel, and then to think, right, well, what do I need to do now? What have I relied on? What is it in my personality that's allowed me to take up this role of being a freelance photographer in the first place. And tenacity is likely to be there, determination and being driven, and those are all marvelous attributes. But then it's a question of, well, where do you put that energy?
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of places that one could be thinking about during a lull or during a downtime.
Sorry to jump in. I think a lot of people think of a lull as a bad thing, but actually it can be pretty cool. Like, not cool, but like it can be pretty helpful. Like for me, I didn't quite realize I moved house about 2.5 years ago. Lovely house, love it a lot. But I bought in quite a nice area, and the kind of the trade-off was having a slightly smaller home office. And so my anxiety was quite high because I was falling over cases, I was falling over stuff like that, and I had a bit of a lull, and I cleaned it all up. I got rid of a load of stuff on eBay. I've talked on the podcast in the past about my sticker system. Got rid of a whole load of stuff, and I started to feel like this weight was kind of lifting up off my shoulders, and I was just like, oh damn, this is great. Then, as I started to feel a bit better, I started to post more online. I started kind of emailing out to more people. I started kind of doing that. Also, I started shooting more projects. And then, a couple of months later, bam, I was back to being busy again. So,
well, it's exactly that. With great challenges that we can't anticipate, or we do anticipate that come upon us. Come opportunities. We just don't know that. We've got to have faith. I think that's the thing. Without saying this in a religious context, we have to have faith that the creative process necessarily has to go through phases of challenge in order to be able to be inventive and to not stay in a comfort zone, to not stay sort of still, because I think there's a huge danger that comfort zones can make you a very brittle in how you run a business, and they're very dangerous places actually. And I think that's so sometimes a hurdle of some sort, or a dip, or something that's forcing you to swerve is unintentionally, yes, but it's actually an incredibly critical part. And I realize that very, very big versions of that, as in the pandemic, it seems a little bit sort of extreme for me to say that. But I would say even this, for the most part, photographers will come out of this, as we emerge slowly, albeit differently, but with having tuned up in one or several areas, so that they'll look back and say, do you know what? Thank goodness that happened. And in fact, I read something the other day which is so interesting. There was a scientific experiment that happened where statisticians were looking at the route that commuters in London took as a result of a 2-day strike. Now, whenever we've heard of a 2-day strike in London, we're all sort of, and people are, commuting to work. It's all, it all seems disastrous. How are you going to get to work? What they did was they analysed what happened to the routes that people use by looking at how they were tapping in and out with their Oyster cards, and discovered that, of course, people had to change their route because of the strike. But a huge proportion of people didn't go back to the old route that they were using afterwards. And what they discovered through this necessity of change was that they'd actually discovered something better. But that was through necessity. Nobody who's used to a commute that they've done for 15 years or something, that's then forced into something, would ever imagine that there's another way around it. But actually, there is. Not always, but often. And I thought that was such an interesting comment to make. And it's a metaphor, but it's very true that obstacles do, might force you to look at things differently. And actually, you've just got to allow it, though. It's about allowing this, into your way of working.
I think there's that balance, isn't there, between the kind of the fear of failure and the comfort zone. It's very much a case of sometimes it's not even that people realize that they are comfortable. They're just afraid of breaking the system, breaking their kind of what they've created. But as you said, every now and again, you kind of need to, I don't know, shake things up a bit. Well,
yes, I think it's as you say, it's the fear of failure. It's the fear of not having if a comfort zone means you're getting regular income, doing something in a regular way, in a predictable sort of arena, all of that's fine. But there's a danger that one becomes more cliched. You create a cliche of your own cliches. And by doing that, then it starts to phase itself out, because everything else around you is kind of moving and changing, and before long, you're inappropriate to that arena that you've been in. And that's when photographers often find they're desperate to get out, but they've left it too late. Well, probably not, but they've just got to reinvent themselves.
Well, it can go both ways as well, because obviously everything outside of the photographer's career can move on, or the photographer's career can they end up personally becoming completely done with what they're shooting, and they become known. When I used to shoot a lot of music photography, and I was quite well known for one particular style, I guess, and one particular type of shot in general. And people come to me and they say, well, that's what we want.
Yeah.
We want a Tom Barnes shot. We want a dark sky and, probably an overexposed face and probably someone squinting. But, that was my thing. That was a long time ago. If any clients are listening, that's a long, long time ago. But at the same time, I kind of got to that part of my career, hadn't realized I was really in a comfort zone, just thought that, hey, I was doing all right. And then kind of got to this point and suddenly went, oh God.
Yeah.
I not only have I been in a comfort zone for probably 1 or 2 years, but I'm really not enjoying. And then I had a crushing week where I suddenly stopped enjoying my work, and then realized that I'd been coasting, realized that I already wasn't doing anything that I wanted to be doing. And at the same time, though, it was kind of the best week of my career, because I suddenly realized that I did want to go off and do something different. And like you say, it's the strike on the tube, right?
Yeah.
So that was my strike.
And thank goodness you discover that after only a few years, because photographers can be in that rut. It becomes a rut without realizing, one's blind to it while you're in it, and you're in that furrow, because it seems successful. You're getting referrals to do the same things, and more clients refer. There's a lot of self-perpetuation going on, and I think some might carry on for 10 or more years like that, and that's why personal projects are so critical. And I mean, we could have a whole talk just on personal projects, but I think, I know we've got other things we want. Yeah, no, really, because, it's the best way. But I think, it's very important to allow sort of for, it doesn't mean to say a jack of all trades at all. It just means to make sure that one is innovating within one's own work and being very self-aware and insightful as to whether or not one's plowing the same furrow. Let's get the metaphors right here. Over and over, so that one gets a bit too deep and doesn't really notice what's going on outside.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I think it's very easy to end up that way.
Yeah. So these lulls do force you to look at these kinds of things, actually.
So if we were to look at maybe something that's kind of tangible for the listeners, what kind of methods would you encourage people to kind of explore, and strategies perhaps for remotivating themselves, but also finding new clients, or kind of reaching out, expanding, exploring? What have you found works in the past with kind of photographers that you've mentored?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that question, actually. As you can imagine, because there's so many different reasons why somebody might be in this position. But I would say probably the most common problem that needs addressing is confidence. Is helping photographers to truly understand and be able to explain and find the visual language for their own work, so that however and whenever and through whatever means they use to reach out to new clients, that's almost secondary. The first thing one's got to get right is, am I ready? Am I in the best position and best place to actually reach out at all? Sure. Of course, in social media, you can do it very sort of silently almost and sort of in a distance. But the whole thing about finding new clients is about relationship building. It is a giant hustle. And I know that it's very different at the moment and difficult at the moment because one can't do it in person. But there's still very similar parallels in that it's about relationship building. And I think at the very point of relationship building is to reach out and say, look, this is me. I'd like you to consider whether I might be a good fit for what you do. But to do that, if we just keep going back to the basics, it's about, do you have the confidence to say who you are and what you do and why? So I think sort of, Greg, your question is, what do I find is probably the most sort of important starting point, perhaps, I think, is to make sure that one's in the best position to be able to, define what you do and why you do it, not just what, it's the why. It's really important to tap into that authentic bit of you. I come across a lot of photographers that find it very hard to say anything other than, I'm a portrait photographer and I like taking pictures of people. And it's not good enough. It's not going to be good enough, I'm afraid. It's not going to stand out. It's not going to give anyone a sense of your value. Why should they hire you? Because, lots of people do that. So a lot of the work I do and a lot of what photographers need to be thinking about is, do they feel comfortable, confident in expressing what they do so that they can stand out? So now more than ever with the COVID situation, photographers need to tune up their website, their offer. Is it refreshed? Can you look back and look back over some of your recent archive work? Should the galleries and the website be reflect better where you are at the moment? How often do you update your website? Is it functionally where it should be? Is your about section, does it waffle and go on and on, or is it nice and succinct, or is it full of art speak, pompous nonsense? Where is it? And a lot of photographers find that very hard, but that's also a very important place to be able to genuinely talk about why your work matters to you, and without it being sort of a long essay about your when you got your first camera, that your father gave you. I mean, I've seen this so many times.
You've been reading my website then.
I have not been reading your website, but you see,
Quickly
so long as
delete
there's something, so long as there's genuine truth behind it, as I say, it shouldn't be pompous. It should be very truthful, but implicit in there is the value and the knowledge that you bring as a photographer to that prospective client, and that's where they're going to find that, as well as a really well curated and up-to-date website that functionally does its job and isn't too complicated. So a lot of the work I do with photographers early on is to try and build the confidence around the language that they use. And photographers can, obviously attempt to do some of this themselves, but it is difficult because you need to have leading questions. You need to help photographers look at their work objectively, and it is very hard to do that on your own.
No, absolutely, it is. Quickly, while we're on the subject of about pages, I think it'd be quite an interesting one. Mine is written from, it's written very much in the first person, and I know that's very uncommon. If you read mine, you'll see that it's about as unpompous as they get. I think I open it with, "You're not trying to hire a deity." So I won't come at you with all the usual guff or something like that. It's very personal. But how would you recommend? Because there's a lot. The problem that I have as a photographer, which is why my about page starts like that, is that everyone knows we write them ourselves, right? So they've got to be authentic. The amount of times I kind of look on other people's, and I'm like, God, this sounds so. This is awful. Because I know they've written it themselves. It's just I don't know where you come down on kind of whether you write it in the third person or first or. Well,
Tom, do you know what? It is all about the brand. It's all about what you're like as an individual, and you're lovely and I haven't met you before, but I'm getting to know you a bit now. There's a lovely informality. There's a slight cheekiness and all that. So what's lovely is that's
charmer.
No, but you know what? It means that your about page is very true and authentic to you. Whereas other photographers who deliberately perhaps and there's no right or wrong about this. Other photographers who want to have perhaps just a different style, who are a little bit more remote, who are more I can't think of the words, but you know what I'm saying. They might like to use the third person because it suits their brand more. But I think there's lots of photographers use third and first. It's totally down to you and what you're like as a person. I think it'd be highly inappropriate for you to use a third person.
Yes, I kind of agree. I was going to use the second person, but it turns out I don't think it really exists.
No, so it is. So it's down to the brand. I mean, we haven't used this word brand very much today, but I mean, branding for photographers is very important, and that's not just about the logo. It's all about the look and feel and the mood and what you're emanating from. Both meeting you as a person, but also the whole thing needs to all be sort of joined up. And if you're, and I'm not suggesting this, if one's a bit of a joker, a real sort of bubbly, effervescent person,
What are you saying?
Versus on the other extreme, somebody very quiet, very sort of cerebral, and very thoughtful, and unimposing and shy, frankly, there'll be very, very different ways of writing about yourself, and it's not appropriate that they are the same. So it's horses for courses is the answer.
I think if you think it feels a bit farty and it doesn't feel like you, change it up.
Absolutely. And you don't want to be unnecessarily pompous and put art speak in there if that's not truly the way you are and who you feel that emanates you. Because other people do often write photographers abouts, by the way, and it's possibly they're maybe the worst ones because, if they get a professional writer who doesn't really understand that person, then it will be very theoretical. And
I had a friend actually write one of mine years and years ago, but I had been friends with him for 15 years and he just happened to be a professional journalist, and it was quite good, but because it was written, it didn't feel like me. It was written by a very good friend of mine. It just didn't feel quite right.
I mean, I do help photographers do this, but it's only after a very intense session, a deep session of understanding what their work's about, because it has to be blended with getting a feel for who you are and what your spirit's like, if you like, and what your energy's like, versus how you speak, what kind of language and the manner in which you speak, and what your work's about. So it's very difficult for a friend to know the professional side of you, probably, which is why the objectivity is quite helpful to sort of tease that out.
I was going to say, it's a good little bit of homework for our listeners.
Definitely.
I know I'll be going off to re-look at my my bio page.
And it's not
hastily bringing it up in the background.
And it's not meant to be long. It is only a few sentences, but the key is to try and ask yourself the question: why do I do what I do? It's very easy to say what, and some photographers even go to the lengths where they'll say what kit and gear they use. That's not really helpful to an art buyer. They just want to understand and get a more of a sense of why they can trust you to do the job that they'd like to pay you a lot of money to do, hopefully.
And I guess it depends a lot on your audience, though, doesn't it? Because you say art buyer, and that in itself is almost feels at the moment like a kind of term that is almost disappearing.
I think it's whoever's got any kind of responsibility or authority or need to make a decision based on what all that they can get without meeting somebody. Are they getting more of a sense of that photographer, both through the work and through the language? And it's just about giving more of a sense of trust. If you are somebody that was once in the SAS and in the paras or something, and a lot of your work's got high energy, high impact, and it's really quite edgy stuff that's very masculine, or I'm just talking about a photographer that I once worked with, it makes sense to say so, because it actually gives you more authority to know that you do understand that very sort of driven world, that very sort of that very masculine world, perhaps. And so to nod to or touch on the fact that was once in their past, I think makes a lot of sense. And isn't it may not seem as if it's relevant to photography, but it actually is, because it's relevant to their to them, the other, and that brings me to a really important point, that to work out a photographer's style, for a photographer to work out what is their style. Of course, it takes years and years to get there, loads of shooting, but really, what is likely to happen over time, and this is what I obviously try and help photographers to look at and identify, is there'll be something about you that comes through into your photography. So just talking about that photographer who was, once upon a time, a para and a high impact, high energy, when you meet him, everything makes sense. All the dots join up. So it's important to know that your style and or the mood and the emotion or whatever it might be in your pictures will be part of what you're like. So somebody that is a adventure sports sort of photographer is likely to be probably a bit of a risk taker themselves, versus somebody that's very shy and very thoughtful but very sensitive and emotional, who might take these beautiful portraits that are all very quiet and sensitive. It's about the identity of the photographer showing in the work. And I know Nadav Kanda's talked about this actually in an article in Lens Culture, I think a couple of years ago. He said it took him years before he'd really truly analysed his own work and realised, oh gosh, I seem to take pictures of people in or remnants of people in landscape or suggestions that people have left behind in landscapes. A lot of photographers don't look and analyze their own work. It's difficult.
No.
It's very difficult. But in doing that, you can start to pull out what's truly you. And it means everything blends well together.
I mean, I did want to pick up on that when you said it at the top of the program, actually, about how you really look at work and ask the questions about why something doesn't work. I feel that we think that as a society and as people that we're getting better and more visually literate, but I think that actually quite often we're fooling ourselves a little bit, and that we think that we're more visually literate, but we're still not asking those questions. We're still not looking about the why some images work and some images don't, to the extent that they sometimes need to be asked. I think that we consume so much data, imagery. I nearly said data.
Okay. Well, what a great Freudian slip there.
Yeah, we consume so much imagery that we perhaps stop asking questions of why it impacts us in the same way, because there's just a torrent of the stuff coming at us the whole time. It's almost like visual overload. And Jackie Jo Hanan, who we had on a few weeks ago, I noticed she did a talk a while back where she talked about the visual diet and the importance of actually looking at what we consume visually is almost as important as what you choose to eat or what you choose to listen to, or any of those things. Like, what we choose to consume visually is important because it's such a big part of our lives now.
Sorry to jump in, mate. That's actually Visual Diet is run by my friend Mimi Gray. It's super interesting, where they talk about the impact of what we consume visually on our mental health. If you want to see more of that, that's actually at visualdiet.co.uk. And back in the room.
Well, I think you've touched on something really important there, and I think that the Instagram sort of era has, well, not just Instagram, just the digital era anyway, and user-generated content. I think the fact there is so much imagery around. I love the fact, Greg, even more now that you have your coffee with your photo books, because people don't analyze pictures nearly as much now as they ever did. I mean, it just doesn't happen. I mean, thankfully, my upbringing, if you like, photographically, was all about sort of trying to understand, why does it work, but to find the language around it. And this is the other thing that I think photographers could really help themselves with, is to work on the language of their own work, because this is another way that, to be able to stand out. We haven't really touched on, have we, sort of reaching new clients, but one thing would help photographers enormously, at a downtime or any time, is to think about the language for their own work, not just that it's, sort of high contrast, full of color, but what else? What are the other interesting sort of conceptual words and emotional language that might come into how your work can appear? And often something I'll do with photographers, to imagine they're on the phone to somebody who can't see their portfolio, and to get them to think about, if I were to describe my work to Joe Bloggs, whoever it is on the end of a phone, what would they say? And I think often what's missing, they might say, yes, it's interiors. No, wait a minute, let me think of something else. It's lifestyle. It's young people. It's often sort of in situ, on location. But what they often miss is the emotion in the picture, and that is if there is indeed emotion in it, of course. But sometimes it's it might be about the nuance between. It's the detail. It's the softness. It's the compassion between people. It's these kinds of words that are often missing, and photographers don't spend time thinking about. It could be that their pictures are very stylized, very austere, very sort of manufactured. That's all fine, but let's find the language, because it's all very well saying, I'm a photographer and I've got a great portfolio and I'd like to show you. I think you might like my work and I'd like you to commission me. That is a given when you put yourself in front of a client. But what they often don't get, which could help a photographer stand out, is a bit of language that helps them to imagine your work being suited to something that they want. And therein, it's the language that's really important.
I guess it's a sense of, we forget that photography is a visual language, and it's easy to assume that everyone translates it in the same way, but different people are going to translate it in different ways. But also the sense that we perhaps have lost the ability to fully translate some of the nuances, like you said, because we so often, I think it's a really interesting, and the second bit of homework for the listeners, pick one of their favorite pictures and perhaps to sit down with it and to try and think of, maybe draw a little spider diagram out with all of the associated words that come to your mind.
And Greg, I'd even say, rather than a single picture, get a little group of 5 or 10, either from a single project or from just a little group, to see, what is it about my pictures that, and it's often helpful to get somebody else to do this. I mean, some of the projects, the workshops I ran that Greg years ago, you may have come to, we would do this in our workshops. We'd get pairs of photographers to talk to each other about their work. And photographers listening to this, especially if they might be, in collectives or something like that, could share little groups of pictures with each other and just sort of informally to say, look, well, what I see, that there is, a very cinematic feel. You've got a really interesting sense of sort of, sort of place as well as whatever. And often what other people see in your work is not necessarily what you didn't intend, but you may be a bit blind to it because you're so close to it. So photographers can help each other do this kind of thing, but it is a very, very important process to do, and that in itself helps a potential client to feel that you have the confidence, not in an arrogant way, but in an assertive way, that you know what your photography is about, and that can be really helpful given the competitiveness that we're going to find even more so, I think, as a result of COVID.
Okay, well, I'd like to jump back briefly to us discussing the strategies for reaching out new clients, because I think once we've kind of started this ball rolling, started thinking about your work, started to think about kind of how you can maybe change some direction. Say that we've done all of this and we're now down and we're kind of feeling quite happy with where we are at that point. You've redone your bio, you've done all of that. What methods do you think work best? And I mean, obviously, as you said before, in a slightly strange times, you're not necessarily going to be able to do as much face-to-face networking as you might want to be able to do. What ways do you feel are effective? What things should people be bearing in mind?
That there's no one way to do it, and that there is no one way to do it. But the most important thing to realize that it's not going to be instant. In other words, you're not going to get an instant reaction, and that it is all about relationship building. I've said that before, but I think it's about and that in itself. And the best way to tap into all of that is to prepare as much as you can before you reach out to a client. So you've got yourself ready, as it were. Your website's in a good shape. You feel as if you're able to describe what you do, and so there's an element of confidence within yourself. What you then need to be thinking about is, I'm not just going to sort of, is there some horrible expression, spray and pray or something? You're not just going to. I don't know where that came from, but you're going to need to be thinking, right? Well, I need to do some research. I mean, the thing about reaching out to clients and lulls is that there's often time involved. You've got time that you don't normally have, or time that you don't normally give yourself for marketing, because marketing is a bit of a drudge. There's no doubt about it, and time is part of the sap that is needed. It really is a time sap. So it's really important for photographers to spend time researching who might be interested in the type of work that they want to shoot. So that's the other key thing, of course. Photographers who are covering a range of areas need to, as far as they can, to try and hone in on a kind of an arena, so that they're not sort of seen as a jack of all trades. But then, and that indeed it's the kind of work that they want to be shooting, which is where we've established that through perhaps personal projects. But yeah, the clients that might be interested in those types of work. So that takes research, but it's not just, okay, I want to shoot for this brand. Well, who in that brand do I get in touch with? Again, photographers forget about, or they may not forget, they realize that it's a really long, very arduous journey to find the individual who they need to connect with, either on the phone, on email, on social media. So something that and it's a very obvious thing to say, but often the most obvious things one forgets. And that is, get into the granularity of who you should be getting in touch with. So it's not just, I like this brand, I'd like to shoot for, North Face or something. Let me follow them on, on all their social media platforms. Let me see if they'll follow me back. I mean, it's terribly obvious what I'm going to say. but it's good to say it in case it resonates with some people. Find out which agency works on that particular account. Who in that agency? Who were the art directors? Who were the account holders? Find individual names and start to build a spreadsheet. Of course, you can buy these lists from Bikini Lists or wherever. But I'm a real advocate of doing some of this hard work yourself, especially when you've got time. And there is time at the moment. And often we photographers bury their heads and say, well, I haven't got time to do this. Now is the time to do it. And you'll learn so much about your client. You need to find out about the client. You need to know everything about them. Crawl all over. What are the most recent campaigns they've done? Who's done it? Which photographers have they worked with? A lot of this stuff you can find online through sort of ad bases and advertising archives and things like this.
There's also websites like Campaign. People are tagged, and you can see who is credited with it.
Yeah, and Lers's archives, that's another one. There are various things like that. But you want to just feel that you're actually knowledgeable about these clients so that you're able to connect in a not just an imaginative, but in an authoritative and knowledgeable way. So if you have found out who it is at the very granular level was responsible for that particular ad campaign at that particular agency, you can follow that particular person on any number of social media outlets. But then you start to comment very particularly, not just liking some of their posts, but you can actually use intelligent comments because you know the background of some of. So it's about, and that's how you build relationships at a level which are meaningful, rather than just hoping that somebody's going to see your email blast, your social media like, or follow, or whatever it might be. So I've forgotten your question now, Greg.
No, I think you've answered it. It's strategies for reaching out.
It's just one of them, which is, yes. So it's about knowing who you are dealing with and not forgetting that actually, just the process of doing that research and being personal. So if you're going to write an email, newsletters are something different. But if it's a personal pitching email that you're going to write to so-and-so, it is dear, Henry or whatever it might be. And it is a short email that doesn't waffle. It's confident. It's not, as I say, it's not arrogant. It's confident. It uses maybe a little bit of the language about your work. My work is this and that. You might include one or two pictures only, and you need to say why you've got in touch. And there needs to be this rather business speak thing called a call to action, which is, why have you got in touch?
CTA.
Thank you, Tom.
Big fan. Big fan.
Yeah. And no, but there really needs to be, it's not just, look, here I am, and let me put that there, but look, go to this link on my website and you'll see this new series of work, or check out this recent campaign that I've done, and I'd very much like to see if, like to talk to you about my book. Keep it short, keep it tight, and also in the subject line, if we're talking about pitching emails, or indeed, pitching emails, the subject line, keep it really, really short and sweet, not least because, if you think about all our inboxes, you might read the first few words, and then if it looks irrelevant, you'll leave it till later and then forget or never look at it. So, and not everybody is ever going to open every email. So if they see something in the subject line, such as, let me try and think, farmer portraits of farm. No, let me just think. Agricultural portraits. Let's think of something. I was just thinking of a picture of yours, Tom, of the tractor. Agricultural portraits, or something that immediately gets right to the focus of somebody's brain, if you like. Loads of people are not going to want to look at agricultural portraits today. They never do, because it's they're dealing with something entirely different. They're not going to open it. That's okay, because you're not trying to appeal to everybody. Mm-hmm. But if you can have a very pertinent, very focused subject line, COVID story might be another one. Somebody that wants, exactly what it is straight away. They might think, I've seen enough COVID stories, I don't want to look at that. Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Greg, that takes me to that point about, or I think it was you talked about rejection, the fear of rejection. It is going to happen. Mm. It is going to happen with whatever creative endeavor you're in.
At what point, though, does it stop being a fear? Because actually, I'm now so far into my career that it doesn't bother me. I just understand that it's a fact of life. I don't think there's a fear there anymore, because I'm like, It happens.
And you know what, Tom? That says to me that you've weathered quite a few storms.
Like you wouldn't believe.
And you've had to adapt. You've also felt what it's like to feel that rejection does happen again and again. And then you know what? Something turns over and something happens. And you've just...
I mean, here's the thing. I'm a problem solver. Not just in my work, but in my career. It's kind of what we do.
It is utterly what you do. And I think it's interesting when I'm going to be sort of talking to this graduate, to help her through her journey. One of the most important things I'm going to say is that, you have to expect problem solving to be part of the daily, diet of what you do. And part of that problem solving is, how do I overcome the problem of feeling rejected? It is a total, there are so many reasons why, a story may be rejected. You thought that it was perfect for this magazine, to get it printed. There are so many reasons. It may not be the right time. It could be, they just didn't see your email. They were too busy. It just didn't resonate with whoever saw it that day. But it's about, the Rosen character about the bear hunt. It's about, it is a barrier. Rejection is a kind of barrier. Then you've got to go around it. You've got to go over it. Maybe you've got to go through it. Then you've got to go under it. But it's about finding a way past it, because they are always going to come towards you. And oddly,
for those who don't know what we're talking about, this is a children's book called We're Going on a Bear Hunt. I'm now obviously a firm fan of. The original version, the guy had a gun and they genuinely went to go and shoot the bear.
Oh, I didn't.
They've changed it, funnily enough. I got told that the other day.
So I suppose my last thought on the whole rejection thing is that unless photographers deeply, truly know and believe that rejection is an integral part of success. I know that sounds a bit of an oxymoron. It's a part of the standard process that you have to be almost rejected before you're accepted. I mean, if you're always accepted, then it just does not happen. So part of what we're saying is whether that what feels like an endless amount of rejection, and keep positive, and have the goals. But if it does keep happening, you have to ask yourself, well, why is this happening? And maybe it's something very simple. Maybe the tone in the email is not right. Maybe your website is not tuned up enough and it's putting people off. There could be other things quite apart from your work. Because being a good photographer, you're not just hired for the photography these days. That's part of the brand. It's not just whether you can take a picture. It's all the collateral around it. It's what you're like on social media. Is your Instagram sort of feed, is it too much about your dog and your kids, as opposed to sort of your eye and how you're seeing your work? There could be other reasons why things are not quite happening. And it's a question of trying not to take it personally, but try, as in, it's not about you as an individual. It might be the way your work is presented, for example, on your website, which is something that can be fixed.
I think most things can be fixed.
Yeah.
Unless you're kind of obtuse and rude, I mean, even that can be fixed. Tom,
you joke about that, but actually, personability
semi-joke
is a really important part of being hired these days. And if you've got a slightly sort of antsy attitude about something, people can pick it up. And
they don't really want that on set.
Yeah.
Most people nowadays, it's like,
Well, a photographer told me, somebody once came to see me years ago who was a little bit prickly, I have to say, when we were talking. And the next day, I obviously, will not give anything away here, said that she had been sacked from her shoot because she was had bad karma. She was told she had bad karma. Now, the karma I could have spotted.
That's them
because
being very polite.
Very polite, but it was very interesting. I felt it, and I spotted. You people exude. So it's about knowing yourself. This is the other thing. A lot of the work I do is helping photographers to know themselves. How much a risk taker are they? How much of a problem solver? What do you exude? What aspects of your personality are need to be worked on and celebrated, and and they don't. Some photographers don't realize that actually who they are is marvelous. It's just they need to package it in a way for people to get to know it. But if there is that sort of aggression or personability is hugely important. and that will help you, for your clients to come back time and time again.
We've touched on it a little bit, kind of obviously getting, obviously touched on it quite a lot because it's the overarching theme of the podcast is speaking to other people and speaking to people like yourself to get external kind of, opinions. For me, I have a group of kind of photographers and people who are completely disjointed from my world of work, who aren't related to me or who aren't, I mean, they're very good friends, but they are completely separate from the world. And I kind of I refer to them lovingly as the board. And I basically go to them when I do kind of bigger things. I go, guys, what do you think? Genuine, and I get very, very good, honest feedback.
Such a great thing.
Yeah, 100%. It's completely invaluable because the problem is you never. Everyone has. I have a very honest wife, so I actually feel like I can turn to my wife and just say, "Is this shit?" And she'll go, "It's not your best work," or she'll turn around and say, "Yeah, that's great." Which obviously is how it happens more often than not. Obviously, because my work's fantastic. But having people that you can be completely honest with. But going back to, I completely hijacked your point about being the brand, is that one of these guys on my board turned around and said, look, Tommy, what you should do is you should put together a mind map of brand TB. And I was like, well, I'm not entirely sure what you mean. And so he kind of introduced me to this technique that I don't think is a very common technique, and I don't think many people use it, but I use mind maps now on a daily basis for pretty much everything. And so when I feel stressed or anxious, I have a anxiety mind map, for example, where I have anxiety in the middle of it. And I go, well, look, what am I worrying about? And going back to what you were saying earlier about kind of thinking about your worries and stuff, I have them all written out and I have them all around a circle of anxiety. And then off each point, I go, well, look, if money's the worry, why am I worrying about money? And so that then branches off into two. And then I go, well, actually, I can fix that one because I just need to invoice that person. And
they're visual. In the end, they're visual things. And I think they do, it's like offloading. In fact, I was just reaching out for something. I've got a little one here. I've got something. I do exactly the same, and they're brilliant.
Yeah. So I actually have one for brand TB. And so on one side, it's got work attributes. And on the other side, it's got personal attributes. And the thing is, I want them to link up. So I then draw lines, I draw connections between my personal attributes and my work attributes. And then if something doesn't feel right, like we were talking about authenticity and being genuine, I'll go, well, actually, I don't want the work to go that way. And I kind of slowly start to phase it out. And so behind my screen here that no one can see, I've got printouts of these mind maps that I refer to hourly. Probably I refer to them a lot, and I have them synced up with my phone, and I can add to them, and then I have it synced in with my to-do list, and yeah, it's great. And but it took me a long time in my career before I could take a step back and actually understand what my attributes were, and I understand what the brand was. Really, I had no idea, because the problem is if you turn around to most people and go, "What's your brand?" They'll go, "Got a cool logo."
Exactly.
And you kind of go,
well, Tom, you've done some great work. You've done some great work, and it sounds like it's ongoing. In other words, and it's integral with everything you do.
You dropped out there. You said
work. No, it sounds like you've done some great work there.
Sorry, that's an ongoing gag. I just can't get enough flattery. Sorry, that's very kind.
No, well, I've completely lost what I was going to say, because I actually thought
she's going to put it on a loop.
Just going back though, Greg, to the core of that, I think the question, which is about reaching out and how to gain new clients. I think it's also true to say that there is a lot of competition out there, and be it a story that you're trying to sort of draw attention to and you'd like published or just seen, or a way of shooting something a bit differently. If you've got something interesting to say, I think people will listen. And it's a question of really looking deeply at your own work and deciding whether or not it's different enough. And I don't mean bizarre and different for the sake of it. I mean whether or not one can get annoyed at being rejected, but actually, if you really look at what you have you really put something that's interesting together that nobody's either seen at that. So you've got to be tough on yourself, and you've got to realize that for clients out there, agents and so forth will be looking at work all the time, and they really are looking for something that will stand out. I know that's tough, and I know that a lot of the listeners will be at various stages in their career, but I think we've got to also, part of our job with this podcast is a bit of a reality check. It is tough. It is tough, and it's so important to try and find your difference, and that difference is often as a result of who you are, not what you photograph. And so the more you can, and this takes time, in your very early 20s, you're not going to know the answers to this, very unlikely anyway. But it's good to know that it's important to be self-aware, and that who you are matters, not who you are, as in where you come from or anything, but what you're all about is where the root of your work and its truth and its value will be. So for listeners who maybe aren't that far advanced in their career yet, just know that that's an important thing to investigate and to be comfortable with. You don't have to change as a person. It's just to be self-aware of who you are and what interests you and motivates you, and to build, a body of work that somehow reflects that.
And I guess the more self-aware you are, the less rejection you'll probably end up having. Possibly,
because you're yes, exactly right. Because you understand the process. Yeah.
The more aware, the more kind of, the more you think about your attributes, the more you're likely to research who you're approaching and approach brands that are kind of aligned with.
You could argue that it makes rejection even harder when it does happen.
Maybe.
but at the same time, it is part of the course. It is something that, at whatever level it will happen. But it is a question of, forcing either a conscious or unconscious adaptation, rethink. And it's good to have to rethink. Again, one can get in a comfort zone of just, being accepted and being one's got to keep that sharpness as a creative. You stay sharp by being challenged. And I think whether you're a writer, painter, sculptor, photographer, that's how you stay sharp and you stay sort of ahead, and you keep being driven by your own creativity. Otherwise, you're going to be you're going to get bored. And that in itself, I think, can be sort of the death knell to a business, which, let's face it, photography business is what we're talking about. And 100%. That can sort of signal the end of that.
So I was just going to say, no one wants to kind of go and sit down and do their brand attributes or whatnot and then be like bored.
Exactly.
No one.
And so a way to also think about it is if something's not working, or you're not happy, or you're not inspired, something's got to change. So those three things, photographers can ask themselves, is that it working, whatever it might be? Am I reaching the right clients? Or, are these projects sort of yielding content that I'm really happy with? Am I actually happy doing what I'm doing? And am I inspired by what I'm doing or how I'm doing it? And if not, something's got to change. Maybe you've got to diversify. Maybe you've got to look at, motion. Maybe you want to look at underwater photography. Maybe you want to look at drone photography. Maybe you need to be thinking about, diversifying or changing something about what you do in order to so we're talking about re-energizing, bringing in a new energy is about getting busy, getting messy, getting a bit messy, not quite knowing what it is you want to be doing, but just, it's not a pure lateral, linear sort of process. And sometimes just, getting a bit random, getting a bit messy, allowing for the unknown and being a little bit divergent in the way one normally does things can actually yield some quite exciting results. And I highly recommend photographers to sometimes think about, if they shoot something in a certain way, and they often do it, and it's not just comfort zone material we're talking about, but think just for a minute, when you've got some time, or maybe not, do the opposite and see what happens. Just, if it's about portraits, and it's, normally, looking at the face, let's have a portrait without a face for a while. It sounds bonkers, but just try it.
Yeah.
It may not be portfolio material, but it's something that will just tease and get you thinking, get you out of your normal modus operandi. And I think that in itself can be energizing, even if the result is not necessarily sort of portfolio worthy content.
Absolutely.
Many photographers talk to me about that, just saying, thank goodness we talked about personal projects, and I've done something, it didn't go very well, but I've now got all this spirit and energy. I know that I can actually find sort of sparks of excitement in my practice. So actually doing something, and it can yield something very exciting. And I know photographers over this COVID period started off perhaps being very successful, in a certain arena, and suddenly everything's come to a stop. My God, what do I do? How do I innovate? And over a period of weeks, by pushing forward, shooting, maybe a lot of work hasn't yielded anything, and then a little tiny glimmer came through, a single shot, and it opened up a whole new arena. I won't say who it is, but there are photographers out there that are finding this, and that's down to being driven, determined to push on forward through the difficult times.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great place for us to leave it today.
Sure.
Ultimately, if people want to reach out to you to perhaps book a session with you, where can they find you, and what can they?
Well, my website is zoewishaw.com with lots of H's in my surname. Perhaps you could put a link to that.
It'll be in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. That will be in the show notes.
And then the first thing we would do is we'd have a sort of 20-minute chat, so just to see if again, it's about relationships, and see whether there's a good fit, and see whether I can help, and to find out what kind of conundrums or obstacles or challenges photographers finding at the moment, and then we take it from there. And there's no fixed way of doing this. I don't try and lock photographers into a certain number of sessions, it's always led by the photographer as to what they need. Sometimes it's just a single session. Other times it might be sort of a series of several or more, or years worth, as it is with some people, but it's always different.
Excellent. And do you have any presence on social media at all that people should be aware of?
Yes, I'm on Instagram. Again, it's just my name, Zoe Whishaw. And yes, I don't do Facebook, so it's and Twitter. So yes, actually, Twitter's probably more where I'm active than Instagram.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll put links to that in the show notes. But before we go, we obviously have our question that we always put to our guests, which is your desert island photo book and camera. We should really kind of have a little theme tune, I think, for this section, Tom. Going forward.
I'll get one of those sorted.
Just kind of like the Radio 4 one, but slightly remixed, so that we don't get sued.
Well, actually, of course, I wanted to think about this, and the book that I've chosen is something called Image Makers, Image Takers.
Oh, I own this.
Oh, do you?
I own this one as well.
You own it. Oh, do you both? So you know what I'm talking about. It's by Anne-Celine Yeager, Thames and Hudson. And it is just so inspiring, just in case other people don't know what it is. It's a series of interviews with photographers and people in the industry, so gallerists and art directors and things like that. And it's just about, I suppose, what has motivated, significant and established photographers, in their career. And what I love about it is it sort of imparts these pearls of wisdom and very true, authentic reasons behind how photographers got where they have. So for me, if I was on a desert island, I think it would keep me in touch with photography and how they got there, which is what interests me anyway. It's about people, and it's about, as I say, that authentic sort of really the bottom line. How do they get to where they've got to? And that's why that fascinates me, because that's really what my work's all about.
Brilliant.
Excellent.
Yeah. No, I highly recommend.
And what
that.
about your camera then?
Well, of course I knew you were going to ask me this, and I just wished in a way, because I'm not a gadget or tech person really at all, and I don't try and get the latest phone or anything like that. I wish you'd asked me this sort of 10 or 15 years ago. So 10 or 15 years ago, and I know that's a slightly sort of cheeky answer, I would have my answer would have been a Lomo camera. I don't know if you ever had a Lomo, the little Russian cameras, and very, very simple, analog film. And I know that I can't take that on the desert island, because I wouldn't actually be able to see the pictures as a result, which nowadays, of course.
There's a lab.
Oh, there's a lab.
There's a lab.
There's a lab. Oh, there's a lab.
We've never actually specified that. Yeah, but no, there's a lab.
Oh, well, I was thinking.
Like a
like
crab.
Sponsor the lab on the desert island. Please get in touch.
This used to be my camera that was on my hip, was wherever I was, in my bag, wherever I was in the world or whatever. And what I loved about it was its spontaneity, and I would push it to its limits, and it's got the simplicity. But, and my very boring answer actually to your question is that I would just be taking my current phone, because I assume there wasn't a lab there, and I don't use my Lomo anymore, which is such a shame. Yes, I'd just be using whatever phone I've got, and I'd be able to see the pictures.
I take both, as you didn't know there was a lab.
Lovely, and a whole stock of film, I hope.
Oh yeah. obviously.
Yes.
But the labs like the Dream Lab, so
Quite an expensive lab. It's quite an expensive lab.
You get a free film when you develop it. It's like an old school Boots kind of vibe.
Marvelous.
It's a nightmare getting the chemicals out there.
But that camera used to just was just so exciting to see what would come from it. Did either of you ever own one?
No, but I
had an instant Lomo.
Oh, I just had a Lomo. I'm not quite sure what the difference was.
Sorry, that wasn't me trying to trump your Lomo. I had an instant Lomo. No, I had a Lomo Instant, which was a more recent thing, which uses the Fuji Instax film, but is a Lomo camera, but shoots basically like Polaroid.
Right. No, that was much more fancy than the originals, which were just so fantastically simple. But you know, the amount of experimentation one could do, because the thing is, what was interesting about it, I don't want to go on about it, but I never used to look through the viewfinder. And that's the difference, because, you know, it made you be very sort of spontaneous and be in the moment without sort of spoiling the moment by, you know, putting something in front of your face. So it was at a time when one could be very, very sort of spontaneous with analog film, and it was fantastic.
That is something that people don't always consider so much anymore, is the idea that when we take pictures with our phones or with cameras with articulated screens or anything like that, you're actually you've broken the connection with the thing that you're shooting in the way that you would if you were working with a rangefinder or an SLR, where you are still seeing the live thing rather than looking at an electronic feed.
And of course that's a kind of a segue into something which just for a second, you know, some projects I'll talk to photographers about. It's important to slow down, and often doing a project using film, you know, real film, can be a fantastic way of changing their way of working, and thinking more slowly and more sort of considered about, you know, whatever it is they're shooting, and not being able to see the picture at the back of the camera. It's a really important thing to think about sometimes, just to change the way you're working, just the tempo of it, just temporarily, just to see what it feels like again. And to remember, film is not everything. Digital is not everything.
I mean, if you want to slow down, I think that's hire a phase one. That will slow you down.
It certainly will.
I feel like one day someone is going to be on the show, Zoe, and when they're asked what book they're taking, they'll be saying, "Are we taking Zoe Wishaw's book?" Because I feel like you've got so much to put into a book. Have you got anything planned?
Do you know, I haven't, but somebody else has said that to me, and I don't know. I think that it would sort of flatten it out if I put it in a book. But thank you, Greg. I mean, it is something I should consider.
Definitely.
But you know, people are so sort of three-dimensional. It just feels very difficult to imagine how to put something like this into a book, because there is so much to say, and we've barely touched the surface here. But thank you for that.
Indeed. Well, we'd love to have you on again at some point down the line.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you.
It's been really, really good to have you on, and I think there's some absolute wonderful bits of advice and pearls of wisdom there for our listeners. So thank you very much.
I'd be delighted to come again. Thank you both so much, and all the very best for your next ones.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Cheers, Zoe. Hey guys, and thank you so much for listening to the latest episode. If you'd like to stay in touch, there are a number of options for you to reach out. We can be emailed at info@exposenegative.com. And you can find us on the website at exposenegative.com or on Instagram at xnegative. We're pretty good at responding to DMs on there. And we're also on Twitter at exposenegative. You can find us personally on our own private accounts on Instagram. Tom is tombarnes.com and I am just Greg Fennell. Cheers. Thanks for listening.